we know how glorious, how beautiful you are. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Powerful, so powerful, your glory fills the skies. Your mighty works displayed for all to see, all to see. The beauty of your majesty awakes my heart to sing. How marvelous, how wonderful you are. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love. 'Cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. You opened my eyes to your wonders anew. You captured my heart with this love. 'Cause nothing on earth is as beautiful as you. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Beautiful one I love, beautiful one I adore, beautiful one my soul must sing. Faithful love flowing down from the thorn-covered crown makes me whole, saves my soul, washes whiter than snow. Faithful love calms each fear, reaches down, dries each tear, holds my hand when I can't stand on my own. Faithful love, from above, came to earth to show the Father's love. And I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face, and Jesus is his name. Faithful love is a friend just when hope seems to end. Welcome face, sweet embrace, tender touch filled with grace. Faithful love, endless power, living flame, spirit's fire, burning bright in the night, guiding my way. Faithful love, from above, came to earth to show the Father's love. And I'll never be the same, for I've seen faithful love face to face, and Jesus is his name.
Welcome back, everyone. This week, our study of Psalms brings us to Psalm 38. yet another Psalm of David, as you'll see in the superscription, if you have it in your Bible. Two interesting things up the top stand out about this psalm, and you may have noticed by now, if I haven't thought to state it explicitly. My preferred approach to studying and making observations about the Psalms as we go through is to try and call out some of the ways in which the psalm that we're looking at is different or unique, because I think, at least it's true for me, maybe not for you, but I think it's easy to read through Psalms and feel like you're just kind of getting the same kind of thoughts and verbiage over and over and over. It all kind of runs together. They all seem very similar. Some of these common thoughts and expressions. Lord, deliver me from my enemies. The Lord is a strong tower and a shield. Very, very common verbiage, and sometimes I'll refer to that kind of thought, or those kind of psalms in particular, as kind of typical psalms, because that is, for the most part, what you encounter. And so as we're going through, especially if there is something about a given psalm that makes it stand out a bit, that makes it a bit unique amongst some of those others that have kind of that typical sort of flavor, that's what I prefer to look for, and what I try to make sure I really note. That, and if they happen to contain any particularly well-known verses, phrases, or thoughts. So with Psalm 38, there are two such things, kind of at a high level. One is this is one of what's known as the penitential psalms. There's 7 of them. We've looked at 2 already. It's been a while since we looked at them, so I don't recall exactly what comments we made at the time were. But Psalm 6, Psalm 32, 51, 102, 130, 143, and then of course this one, Psalm 38. And they're called the penitential psalms because they deal with, obviously, the topic of repentance. These are psalms in which the psalmist is reflecting upon sin in his life, how odious it is, and how very sorry he is about it, and how he wants things to be made right again. So a penitential psalm, and this psalm in particular, the psalmist we find suffering physically, mentally, socially, politically, and spiritually. So a number of different ways in which he voices these negative aspects and consequences of sin in his life. So that's one thing. It's one of these 7 penitential psalms that really hits home on this particular topic. The other thing, and you can't help but see this as we make our way through it, it uses a lot of very vivid, very colorful, very descriptive imagery. Right? It's chock full of metaphors, and it uses them in rapid succession. And we've seen that with some psalms before, but and I suppose that's true of what I just a few moments ago noted as typical psalm type metaphors. Right? The name of the Lord being a strong tower, the Lord being a buckler, a shield, a rock. Those are all metaphorical. But this psalm in particular has a lot of, as I said, very vivid, very visceral kind of metaphors. And in that respect, you might liken it, I think, to the Old Testament book of Micah. Micah, amongst the minor prophets, is particularly known for using the same kind of very colorful, very vivid imagery in his writing. So those are the two things that really make Psalm 38 kind of stand out, that make it a bit different, perhaps, than some of the others. And we'll note as we go through, too, a couple of things in this psalm kind of bring to my mind Job in particular, which, of course, is fitting, right? You have someone here who's talking about the way in which he's suffering and wants things to be fixed. I almost can't help but think of Job. But anyway, here's a breakdown. You're kind of trying to look at a high level. How do things kind of fall out in this psalm? What's a good outline? In the first 2 verses, we start out with the psalmist's plea, right? His plea, and again, it has to do with this situation in which he finds himself. Verses 3 through 14 which is definitely the bulk of this psalm, he talks about his suffering. And this is really where you find a lot of that vivid, kind of colorful, metaphorical language that I mentioned just a moment ago. Physical, mental, social. Again, he puts it in kind of different ways. The third part, verses 15 through 20, so roughly a quarter. So this is the second biggest chunk. He talks about his confidence. Again, which is very typical for Psalms in general, but for penitential Psalms in particular. Right? He goes through talking about the problems, the suffering, but then kind of closes it off with his confidence, and then lastly, again, as is fairly typical for the Psalms, the last two verses, a prayer. Right? So he makes a plea. He details his suffering, again, because of sin. And then he closes out with confidence, expressing confidence in God, and then a prayer. Okay, so starting out the first two verses, the plea that he makes, O Lord. Again, as we were discussing in our Sunday morning class, you'll notice Lord is in all caps. It is the covenant name of God, and the ASV it doesn't shy away from it. The King James has, O Lord, rebuke me not in thy wrath. The American Standard Version has Jehovah, rebuke me not in thy wrath. And again, as we discussed, Jehovah is an English transliteration of the German translation of the Hebrew Tetragrammaton, right? So it's taking Hebrew letters, expressing them as best they could in German, which then in turn gets transliterated into English. So Jehovah is an English rendering of the covenant name of God, the Tetragrammaton, which, as we were discussing in class, is amongst our Jewish neighbors, literally never spoken. But anyway, again, here it is. It's literally here in the psalm. O Lord, Jehovah, rebuke me not in thy wrath, neither chasten me in thy hot displeasure. All right, so he understands. I think it goes without saying that the psalmist David understands that if the Lord were to rebuke him and chasten him, it's certainly within the Lord's prerogative to do, and it would be the right thing to do. Right? It would be justice served, and he also understands that that God is upset over his sin. Right? He talks about God's wrath, God's hot displeasure. So he understands, as someone who has sinned, who has run afoul of God's law, he deserves rebuke and chastening. For thine arrows stick fast in me, and thy hand presseth me sore. So he understands that he deserves rebuke and punishing, and there's a bit of, I guess, different thoughts about verse 2 in particular. Brother Waycaster notes it here too. So does he mean by verse 2 to mean, it says, thine arrows stick fast in me, and thy hand presseth me sore, that the things that are happening to him, this suffering that he's going to describe from verses 3 all the way down through 14, that God is inflicting all these things upon him because he has sinned, right? And right there you get a bit of Job's friends. Job, these terrible things are happening to you because you've sinned, because you've been wicked. That's why you're being subjected to all these horrible things. So is that what he means? Or is it the case, as Brother Waycaster believes, and as he mentions here in his commentary, that he's speaking here as if God has, as if arrows are descending down from heaven, or the hand of God has pushed him down, right? In other words, God is striking him. God is, all of these things that are happening to him are coming from God, and it's rebuke, it's retribution for the sin that he's done. And I suppose you could read it either way. I'm inclined to agree with Brother Waycaster, because he's pleading for this not to happen. Right? He's saying, don't rebuke me, don't chasten me. And he understands that if God were to do that, the arrows would stick fast, the hand would press him sore. Again, I'll leave it to you. If you're reading commentary, you're reading scholarly thoughts on this passage, you'll find people who take it both ways. either way, regardless of what David has in mind when he says this, either way, he recognizes that sin is wrong, it's transgression, and that it is deserving of rebuke, chastening, punishment. So that's his plea. Don't strike me down. Okay, verses 3 through 14. He details the suffering, and again, look, as we're going through here, pay attention to the aspects of it. Verses 3 through 8, he talks about physical suffering. Verses 9 and 10, he talks about mental suffering. Verses 11 through 14, he talks about social suffering. So as we're going through, he notes these in different ways. So we'll look at verses 3 through 8, this physical suffering, and again, pay attention to the graphic, colorful nature of the metaphors that he uses here. He says, there is no soundness in my flesh because of thine anger, neither is there any rest in my bones because of my sin. And again, he's here attributing the fact that there's no soundness in his flesh to God's anger. Has God caused this, or has God already stricken him? As I said, different thoughts on that. Think for yourself. Research it if you want to dig deeper. Neither is there any rest in my bones because of my sin. For mine iniquities are gone over mine head as a heavy burden; they are too heavy for me. My wounds stink and are corrupt because of my foolishness. Right, so a festering, infected, disgusting wound. Again, graphic imagery. I am troubled, I am bowed down greatly, I go mourning all the day long. For my loins are filled with a loathsome disease, and there is no soundness in my flesh. I am feeble and sore broken, I have roared by reason of the disquietness of my heart. Okay, so, pretty graphic. And the question is posed. Brother Waycaster notes this as well. And again, maybe it plays into a bit, how do you take verse 2 and 3, and what's actually happening to him, and to what is it to be attributed? What is the illness here? And I think the common thought, certainly Brother Waycaster's and I'm inclined to agree, is that he's speaking metaphorically, hyperbolically here. Clearly he's reflecting upon something terrible that has happened that has caused him to feel this way. I don't think he's talking about a literal physical illness that he has, for two reasons. One, because he goes on to describe other ways in which he's suffering. Not to say that it couldn't be the case, but it would seem that the physical description is just one of multiple metaphors that he uses to try and describe it. And secondly, the question is posed, well, what is the illness, right? What is the problem? What is the disease here? And it seems to be the case that he has so many different things going on that it doesn't make sense for it to be any one thing. He uses multiple different, again, rather extreme and hyperbolic images that are associated with illness, disease, wounds. And again, I'm not saying it can't be the case that he really is suffering these things physically, as he's writing this. I think rather it's intended to be metaphorical, colorful language to paint a picture in the reader's mind of just how bad this situation is, how much he suffers because of this sin. So we have these physical descriptions. The next two verses 9 and 10, he talks of still talking about suffering, but it's more in a mental state. Lord, all my desire is before thee. In other words, this is all he can think about, right? It's the only thing in his mind. He is single-mindedly focused upon it and nothing else. All he wants is to have things made right with God. And also, I'll just call your attention there in verse 9, Lord, not in all caps, right? So this is a different word. This is not the same Lord that we saw in the first verse. In the first verse, again, the ASV is Jehovah. Here it's Lord in a more common sense. You may think of like in the UK, they have lords and ladies. So lowercase Lord is that, or at least uppercase L and then lowercase O-R-D. So, Lord, my desire is before thee, my groaning is not hid from thee. My heart panteth, my strength faileth me, and as for the light of mine eyes, it is also gone from me. So he is suffering not only in a physical sense, but in his mental state as well. He's exhausted. He has nothing more to offer. He is broken up. He is utterly dejected. The only thing he can think about is trying to find some resolution to this sin problem that is plaguing him. He goes on in the next few verses to detail his suffering in a social sense. And this first one, verse 11, I can't help but think of Job. It's a little bit different situation. But he says, "My lovers and my friends stand aloof from my sore, and my kinsmen stand afar off." So you remember, Job suffered physically, he suffered mentally, just like the psalmist here. Again, as you're reading through these physical descriptions, verses 3 through 8, think of Job covered in sores, sitting there in the ash pile grieving. It's a good picture to kind of put alongside this. Remember Job's wife, tells Job, curse God and die. Right? She's of no mind that he should lament his condition terribly much. His friends, they come. So here, the picture here is someone who is sick, who is covered in sores, who's probably smells terrible because it's all infected, and they're down and out, and no one wants to come near. Right there, lovers, friends, they're going to keep their distance. They don't want to be anywhere near you. His kinsmen stand afar off. So in my mind, maybe Job's wife fits that just a bit. But his friends, on the other hand, they don't stand afar off. They show up. And perhaps I think maybe that's a testament to the kind of person that Job was, the fact that they actually came. Even though they show up and they give him the worst possible advice. With friends like Job's, you don't need enemies, that's for sure. But anyway, I read here verse 11, I can't help but think of Job. They also that seek after my life lay snares for me. They that seek my hurt speak mischievous things and imagine deceits all the day long. A thought that we've seen numerous times already in the Psalms. His enemies are out there looking to take advantage of the situation, right? So his friends aren't going to come near him. They're going to keep their distance. His enemies are going to take advantage of the situation, right? He's suffering. He's dejected. He's down and out. They're not going to let a good opportunity go to waste. But I, as a deaf man, heard not, and I was as a dumb man that openeth not his mouth. Thus I was as a man that heareth not, in whose mouth are no reproofs. So he's like, you almost get the picture here of someone who's like, I would care and do something about it if I cared, if I had the energy and had the ability, but I'm as good as a man who can't hear, as good as a man that can't speak. Right? My enemies are looking to take advantage of me. My friends won't help me, and oh well. I'm so down and out. I just don't even care. It's as if I can't hear, can't speak. I'm finished. For in thee, O Lord, do I hope, that thou wilt hear, O Lord my God. Right? So he switches here from talking about his suffering to talking about the confidence that he has. Clearly he has no confidence in himself. He's suffering. He's as good as a man who's deaf or as good as a man who's dumb. Right? In other words, for all intents and purposes, functionally useless. Is what the point that he's trying to make. What does he have? If he doesn't have confidence in his own ability to deal with this, what does he have confidence in? Verse 15, thou wilt hear, O Lord my God. He has confidence in God. For I said, hear me, lest otherwise they should rejoice over me. When my foot slippeth, they magnify themselves against me. Again, those enemies who will take advantage of him in his diminished state. For I'm ready to halt, and my sorrow is continually before me. That verse 17, I find that one verse particularly hard-hitting. I'm ready to halt. My sorrow is continually before me. Right? I'm finished. I can't go on. The only thing ahead of me is sorrow. I don't want to keep moving in the state that I'm in. I'm ready to halt. For I will declare my iniquity, I will be sorry for my sin. again, this gets at the root of the problem. Why the situation that he's in? Why? Here you go. Here's the reason. Verse 18. And again, we saw a bit of it at the very beginning with the plea that he started with, but this is the cause of his problems. But mine enemies are lively, they are strong, they that hate me wrongfully are multiplied. They also that render evil for good are mine adversaries, because I follow the thing that good is. They hate him, they want the worst for him. Why? Because they know that despite the fact that he has sinned, that he is here in this sorrowful state over his iniquity, he still wants to do the right thing. You might note here alongside this Romans 7, Paul, they're drawing a contrast between the condition of a person living under the Old Testament versus the New. That's his ultimate point. But he has a similar train of thought there, where he recognizes that he has sinned, and he's trying to figure out how to deal with it. Ultimately, you come to Romans 8:1, the answer, right? Christ. That's the ultimate answer to the problem. But it's a similar situation, right? I've done this thing, sin, and I'm essentially a dead man walking because of it. But what do? I still want to do the right thing, and that's the key here. He wants to do the right thing. This is the reason his enemies hate him. I can't help but think, we mentioned Job earlier, his friends come along and they tell him all these awful things that are completely wrong about Job's situation. And I cannot help but think that part of the reason they do it is jealousy, right? They know that Job is a good man, he's a righteous man, or surely they must. They don't say that, they tell him he's a wicked sinner, but surely they know that's not true, that with the kind of life that he led. They're jealous, and sometimes it comes down to that. Sometimes people in this life will have it in for you just because they know you're a good person, you're trying to do the right thing, and they can't stand it. That's what you find here in Psalm 38:20. So he closes out the last two verses with a prayer. Brief thoughts in closing. Forsake me not, O Lord. O my God, be not far from me. And I think he knows that will be the case. Make haste to help me, O Lord, my salvation. Hurry. All right, so that is Psalm 38. Lord willing, we'll continue next time with Psalm 39. And again, kind of thinking back on Psalm 38, the two big things that stand out about it: number one, a penitential psalm, and we noted the other six. There's 7 total. And also this very colorful language that he uses, all these metaphors to describe just how terrible, how badly off he is because of sin. It's a good psalm for that in particular. But anyway, thank you for your attention. We'll continue on next week. Thanks.
Over all the earth you reign on high, every mountain stream, every sunset sky. But my one request, Lord, my only aim, is that you reign in me again. Lord, reign in me, reign in your power, over all my dreams, in my darkest hour. You are the Lord of all I am, so won't you reign in me again? Over every thought, over every word, may my life reflect the beauty of my Lord, 'cause you mean more to me